Hello Tasmanians, this is about storytelling. And I want you to relax into this. This is really simple, what we're going to talk about now. There's a guy named Peter Drucker, you might have heard of him, especially if you studied business in any way. And he was this great American business thinker on strategy. But what he said is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. He said culture is more important than anything. And culture, actually, we can't explain what our culture is when we're inviting people to Tasmania. We can't say, this is Tasmanian culture. We actually have to show it to them. And in storytelling, you show, don't tell. And that's how we get this work done, and it's a lot of fun if you can practice and get better and better at it. Story is the realm of emotion and humanity, and it's a way to get inside people's memories. They can't forget a story. They can forget facts, but at the end of the day, hearing 1,000 messages, they'll remember a good story. This is something kids are born with. Every 8-year-old you know can tell a great story, and they also have a sophisticated way to tell and evaluate a story. When my daughter is listening to me talk, she knows when I'm telling a story and I have her full attention and I can add all kinds of detail to it. When I'm telling her facts or trying to convince her of something, or when I use abstract language and big adjectives, she gets bored and she stops listening. What my daughter always wants from me is, and then what happened? And then what happened? So let's remember that as we're thinking about storytelling. The neat thing about storytelling is scientists, neuroscientists, brain scientists have understood when we put us in an MRI machine, we can't actually tell the difference between experiencing something and hearing a good story. Our brains actually don't know the difference, and that's a great advantage for us when we're telling a story. And it's a reason why when we read a novel or watch a movie, we sometimes cry or laugh. We feel like we've become the character. We get nervous when the character is nervous. When someone in an adventure movie is going to jump off a building, we feel that. We look over and we feel like we're going to jump off a building. So let's remember that when you tell a good story, you're doing magic. And stories are always about human choices and changes. So focus on that when you're telling a good story. Who was it? What is the choice he or she made? And what was changed because of it? And it's just a very simple way to remember what a story is and is not. The cool thing about stories is there aren't that many kinds. When we tell a good story, we're telling only about 6 or 7 kinds of stories. The oldest one is called Overcoming the Monster. The problem in a monster story is a monster. And whether it's an actual monster like David and Goliath or something we have to overcome as people, either way, we're fighting together to overcome something. And that's the oldest kind of story we have. And that's why I use David and Goliath as an example. The oldest written story in human history is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's actually about a little village that's being devoured again and again by a big monster. And the hero, he's kind of a lazy king. And he sends person after person to go kill the dragon, the monster, and they get eaten. Until he realizes, all right, it has to be me. I have to go do it. I have to go kill the monster. So he takes his sidekick with him, and they go, and over the course of this adventure, he becomes better and better, his best self. And he has to sacrifice something. His best friend gets eaten. And in the end, after a long struggle, he beats the monster and comes back to his village transformed. And his village is transformed with him. The Epic of Gilgamesh, like I said, it's the oldest story we have, yet this is the same plot as most James Bond movies. Even people use overcoming the monster in political campaigns today. So it's the same story over and over again. Another good story is the Cinderella story, Rags to Riches. And we'll talk about that a little bit in these videos. So you recognize immediately what the Cinderella story is all about. Rags to riches, whether the riches is actual money or maybe something really meaningful. Another great story is the voyage or the voyage and return, the journey. And we talk about journeys all the time. I'm on a journey. But if you think about maybe The Wizard of Oz, someone goes on a journey and returns completely different after having overcome great odds. There always has to be a problem when we're telling a story. And of course, they don't have to be as big as The Wizard of Oz. They can be small things. Another plot is Hero in a Hole. And that comes into play in Tasmania sometimes for a long time when it feels like you're up against it. You can't get out. When you do get out of it, it feels wonderful. Alice in Wonderland is an example of one of those stories. So you can think about those plot types as you're telling your own story or telling stories of the people you admire. Broadly, a kind of way to tell a story, a plot, is a comedy. And we love comedies. It turns out some folks have done some research into this, and if you tell a bit of a joke, or not even a joke, say something slightly funny as you're making the pitch to them, as you're inviting them to your location to your place, to your region, to Tasmania. If you can get a smile out of them or a bit of a laugh, they'll pay 18% more. They have a closer relationship to you because of it. So comedy is great. It makes us feel good. And you can tell market holders all the time use comedy as they're trying to warm things up between their potential customer and themselves. And tragedy too is important. We feel really close to someone when we share something terrible or difficult that they've gone through. So we can be honest about that kind of storytelling as well. If you imagine again someone who's selling essential oil soap, who'd had a really stressful job before, she might talk about how she'd made this huge decision to quit that job and to move into something really healing and healthy. And as we listen to her story, we want to be her. We understand that if we buy her product, we become her a little bit. So tragedy can be a great way to tell a story as well. And then the ultimate story, I suppose, is the rebirth story. We can be absolutely transformed by maybe your region or the story you're telling, or by Tasmania. And if you think of a rebirth story, obviously Christmas time and Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. He goes from being a terrible miser into being a really helpful, wonderful, giving person at the end. And his journey from miser to wonderful person at the end, that's what storytelling is all about. And we can think about that, those choices and changes as we're telling our stories. But don't forget, and this is the most important thing, every story begins with a problem. When we start our story, whenever it is, we have to understand there's a reason to tell it. And usually that is a problem. If you think of a romantic comedy, usually the main people, the man or the woman in the woman, or the man in the man, these are unhappy, unfulfilled people. And the moment they meet, that's when the story begins. They make eye contact across the room, and usually they hate each other in the first scene. But they get closer and closer to success, and they have failures, and they get closer to success, and they have failures, on their way to what we all want from them, which is for them to kiss in the rain at the climax of the story. And then we just want out of it. We don't want to talk too much about how it feels like as they walk off into the sunset. The important thing is the hard work on their way there. And that's the real meat of storytelling. And you always want to make sure that you're using sensual details. What does it smell like? What was that day like? Was it raining? When you're telling a story, you want immediacy. And so use those five senses as much as possible. And the touch and the sounds. Make sure it all comes to life for people. You know, when you walk into a cafe and you smell the scent of maybe roasting coffee, there's something about that smell that brings you back to that place. Now, the important thing as well, when you're telling a story, let's say you're telling the story of your region, the story of your business, the story of Tasmania, make sure you have examples. And we're going to work on that a little bit. Be as micro as you can be as specific as you can be. Tell stories of people, what they've done, what they've created, and think about what might make them Tasmanian or might make them uniquely of your region. And we're going to work on that in some of these videos. Up next, we're going to talk about the Tasmanian story.